Welcome to APA's weekly webinar. My name is Billy Zydick, Manager Special Projects for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA webpage later this afternoon. You'll receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days with a link to the webpage where all webinar recordings are housed, as well as a link to our upcoming webinars. We have webinars planned out through December 2021, and many are open for registration. Professional continuing education and AIA CLU credits are being offered for today's program. If you are an AIA professional requiring a certificate, please send an email to me at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @apa.org, along with your AIA membership number if you have not done so in the past. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by one of our presenters. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Carolyn Farley, who will introduce the presenters for today. Carolyn, take it away.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you making the time in what we know is a busy time of year and a distracting time of year with the basketball tournament happening around the country. We are going to get started with some required information that we share since this is receiving credits for the AIA. The credits earned upon completion will be reported to the AIA as a continuing education session. Certificates of completion are available for both AIA and non-AIA members upon request, and this is registered for professional education. As such, it does not include content that may be deemed or construed to be approval or endorsement by the AIA or any material of construction or any method or manner of handling, using, distributing, or dealing in any material or product. Our course description is that the pandemic has created a breadth of challenges for campuses, identifying opportunities to develop efficiencies among staff roles and campus space that can be important ways to save money and to provide a higher level of service through co-location. This session will explore some leading practice shared services models that have produced a win-win-win for the campuses they serve. These wins are financial, space efficiency, and customer satisfaction. Our learning objectives for today are to define shared services, to understand the shared services models. We will consider requirements to maximize the value of shared services, explore process for imagining, designing, and implementing these spaces, detail the benefits of shared service models, and last but not least, describe common implementation barriers. Our speakers and presenters today include Melissa Shooter, who is the Executive Director of Business Operations at the University of Louisville, Lee Smith, a Senior Director with Huron Consulting Group, and Jeremy Dixon, the One-Stop Director at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. And I will serve as your moderator today. So to get us started, Lee, if you could start by defining shared services in terms of operating models, staffing, and space, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Carolyn. It's a great question, and it's a question we could actually spend quite a bit of time talking through. Essentially, shared services is the idea that for a specific function or a group of functions that you're able to consolidate service delivery from multiple groups on campus into a fewer number of groups, in some cases just a single group. Now, the way that this looks on an individual campus may look very different than it does on other campuses. There's quite a bit of variation here. But let's walk through first the operating model, and I have a slide to go along with this content. So when we begin to talk about the operating model, there are a number of elements that we consider. And operating model on any campus involves your culture, it involves your leadership processes, it involves the way that you manage the work and your structures as well. Let me talk for a moment about how we typically see shared services organized from a work perspective. And that's what you see represented in the pyramid here. And so if you think about at the top levels of the institution, that executive leadership really sets the strategy for the institution overall. And then particularly within administrative services. So whether you're thinking on the faculty and staff side, like human resources and finance and procurement, or you're thinking on the student side, like registrar, financial aid, admissions, you have specific centers of expertise on your campuses that have expertise in these areas. They develop the policies, they create the procedures, they develop and train staff with expertise in these singular areas, and they really serve as the ultimate points of escalation for needs that come up within these areas. Often these centers of expertise will have business partners that are part of them, and the business partners provide resources that connect different people on campus, particularly at the manager level, the associate or assistant dean level, et cetera, into the centers of expertise, particularly to help with strategic type decisions. In a shared services model though, what you begin to create is this concept that I've represented here as a service center. And you see that the goal with a service center is to move a high percentage of customer interactions into that service center. And so you want to focus particularly on customer-facing services, whether those are customers that are internal to the institution, like faculty and staff and students as well, or customers external to the institution, like prospective students, for example. The service center focuses on developing specialized talent that can provide service across multiple areas. Where many campuses today have staff that focus on generalized services, and they really focus in that generalist manner with many, many different types of responsibilities. In fact, we see many staff members on campuses having 20, 30, 40 plus different types of responsibilities. In a shared services model, you really emphasize the role of specialists in limiting the number of responsibilities an individual has to try to drive efficiency, to try to improve service, to try to increase compliance, et cetera. And we'll get back to some of those benefits later. Ultimately, if you can drive some of this work to self-service, there is an even higher benefit as well. But when we talk about shared services, it's particularly the activity that's represented here within the service center. And again, thinking of the staffing as really a specialist model rather than a generalist model. Now, if we shift to the next slide and we think a moment about how these functions can be organized on campus, what you see here is a collection of representative operating models that many universities employ. And depending on the operating model you choose, it can have different settings in terms of what your straight line reporting relationships look like. If there are dotted line reporting relationships, what your funding model and alignment with your overall institutional budget model looks like. What you'll notice though is that there are also decisions that relate to the physical location of shared services. You can have shared services located more centrally where they're housed near or with the functions. You can also have them located on campus in a way that's closer to the customer. So there are a number of decision points here. We're going to hear some examples from the University of Louisville and the University of Alabama at Birmingham today. But one point I want to make is when it comes to shared services, there's not a single definition that applies. There are a number of different approaches here you can take in terms of developing and deploying your overarching operating model. Carolyn?
Very good. Thank you, Lee. So, Jeremy, I'm pulling up a slide that shows the various services available to students in the one-stop center at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Can you talk a little bit about why this service center was established?
Sure. So at UAB, the one-stop was actually established for twofold, really. one, we were doing a customer service initiative, really trying to emphasize customer service throughout the campus, but really wanting to provide better customer service to our students, but also because we had a building that was called our student center that housed numerous offices such as financial aid, records, admissions, student accounting, or bursar at maybe other campuses that needed to be torn down and rebuilt to be a more traditional student center. And the idea when bringing that building down was going to displace all those offices across campuses and not make them as close together as they once were within one building. And so you had the student potentially walking almost a mile in a urban campus to go from one office to the next. So the idea was to combine the student-facing functions of all those offices into one, thus the one stop, where students could come get their questions answered by with questions about student accounting, again, records, financial aid, because all those things are really interrelated. They kind of overlap a lot of things. And so when you ask one question of one office, they often will say, well, now you need to talk to the other office. And so by combining them all into one, we don't have that shuffle, and we're not telling students to go from one place to the next. And that's why the one stop was created, was to eliminate that. And when they rebuilt the building, to only bring back the one stop into that building and to allow for more space in the student center to be utilized by students and not office space.
Very good, thank you. And now I'm pulling up some images of that space. With any change, we imagine that there's going to be some resistance.
Sure.
So could you talk a little bit about those you encountered, perhaps share one with us and how you all work to overcome that?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that most people will probably encounter, and I'm sure Melissa can speak to this a little bit as well, is that when you take some functions out of other offices and put it into one, you have the fear of somebody in that office is probably going to lose their job. For instance, in our picture that you see there, we have a desk, a welcome desk when you first come in to our office, and all those other offices that were once in the student center had a desk at the very front that greeted students and answered students' questions. And a lot of those people that worked at those desks thought that their job was going to be eliminated by us existing or being brought into existence, when actually that wasn't the case at all. It really just allowed those offices to focus more on their back office or back of office processing in order to get those things done in a more efficient manner to better serve the students, so that they're not constantly answering very low-hanging fruit questions, which our office can do. And we can do it with a customer service focus, whereas those other offices didn't really have that focus at that time.
Very good, thank you. And I'm just going to take note while we're sitting on this slide. You had almost 56,000 visits in 2020, a year when the campus was substantially remote in activity. We're going to come back to that question around, you know, service during the pandemic, but I thought, well, we're on this slide, I'd like to take a look at that. So Melissa, we're going to turn to you now, and I would appreciate it if you would address the same for the Business Operations Center at the University of Louisville, which is more administratively focused. Again, we have a slide that highlights the services that have been co-located under this umbrella.
Hi, thanks, Carolyn. Well, so the best laid plans, right? So as Lee pointed out, not all shared services are the same. And in our case, we set out to do process by process improvements. And as we would gain improvements, we would then grow to the next and staff accordingly. A couple of mergers later, we found that we were doing some departmental support, and then eventually even now strategic support for all of the administrative areas of the university. And so as we approach that, I think setting up strong relationships with central offices, understanding the customer need, much like UAB, we also had a service component, and we're driven primarily as a service component and efficiency operation. So we also, in addition to transacting specific processes, we also have a customer service quality improvement operation, and that operation handles the frontline calls. So where Lee talked about the general, like having specialists, the folks who know the exception to the exception and know how to work with central offices to move transactions on behalf of departments. We also have, that those generalists who answer the phones and direct folks to the right places. And in an institution, with 10,000 employees, multiple campuses, changing processes, it's good to have a single call line that they could get into. And then all that feedback from the call line then feeds any further enhancements that we do around the processes that we're managing or we partner with our central offices on. So we've had much growth we've been around for 5 years and have grown. I think you have to be prepared to scale. So again, we did not go with a big bang approach. We went with the process by process, managed mergers as they occurred, and then have continued growth to benefit the university.
Very good, thank you. And I'm sharing some information here regarding your satisfaction numbers. Is there anything in particular you would like to speak to here?
Yeah, I really, we lead with a transparency to our operations. So we use a customer relations management tool that allows us to measure our success. As you can see, we have great numbers, 97.8% in 2020, 99% satisfaction with walk-in, creating opportunities for individuals to provide that feedback. So we use a happy or not station to gather our walk-in. We also manage live chat satisfaction. And it would, during the pandemic, and we can talk more about this down the line, we were uniquely set up to meet the needs of the university to take calls around COVID. And so with an appropriate FAQ and an understanding of what we escalate and where we advance calls, we were able to, within 72 hours of the ask, have a team up and ready to take calls around the university. And even the larger community, we get calls. You'll also see in the graph below that our growth over those 5 years, even at a time when a lot of work receded due to the pandemic, we have stayed above our numbers from last year with new tickets.
That's tremendous, thank you.
And then in the next slide, you'll see we do have a physical presence, and our physical presence allows us to do I-9s for all hires at the university. Another thing you'll see there is the graphic one. Our first process out the door was onboarding for students and temps, and we eliminated a 32-page paper packet and took everything online, which was in line with our overall kind of values. I have to give, Lee and I worked together to stand up this operation 5 years ago. And so we have our CARDS cheer, centralized, automated, responsive, data-driven, and standardized, simplified processes. So those still guide us today whenever we're working design work on processes.
Very good, thank you for that. And for those who might be interested, as we were prepping for this, I actually went to the University of Louisville website and did a little search to find out some more information. And they have a really wonderful presentation that actually Lee was a part of at the time, that was a presentation to the staff impacted by this initiative to really bring them along in the conversation. And I think that was really key to some of the early successes that they have experienced, and we'll get into some of those details. And Lee, since I mentioned it, since you were part of a development of each of these centers, can you please share what you would consider to be the critical success factors? These efforts may be related to leadership, communication, and stakeholder engagement.
Absolutely, and great question, Carolyn. As many of us know who have worked on university campuses for many years, change is not always easy. And so when you want to implement transformational change that aligns with some of these shared services models we're discussing today, it can really be a challenge for campuses. And there are a number of strategies that I found that can be successful. Now, I had the great honor of working with both Jeremy and Melissa to stand up their respective centers. And of course, all the talent they bring to the table has really been part of their overall success. In addition to that, there are 5 factors that are extremely important in my experience. And I'll start at the base of the pyramid here. And the first is the concept of active sponsorship. This is the idea that your leaders across campus are engaged in the change. And what I like to say is that they are expressing, modeling, and reinforcing the change. They are verbally and in writing indicating that they support this new shared services model. They are allocating funding. They are indicating to their teams that they want substantial effort invested there. And they are creating reward systems that allow people to see that they're valuing those individuals who are really pushing forward to this future state. The second piece here is communication. And on any campus, we always talk about the importance of communication. But what I find at times is that we on campuses spend too much time talking about what is going to change and maybe not enough time talking about why it needs to change. So part of what I do with any campus who's undergoing a transformation like this is to build a case for change. And we do that by asking really 4 questions. What is going to change? Why is it changing? What's going to be the impact of the change? And then what are the costs or consequences of inaction? What are the problems with just maintaining the status quo? And if you can provide detailed answers to those questions, they then form the basis of your communications and really help you articulate that why. The third element is governance. So what's the decision-making process going to look like? What is the role of the staff people who lead your shared services organization? What are the roles of the leaders of these other centers of expertise or the functional areas? Who makes decisions about what's included, excluded? And being really clear on that up front is important. The fourth area relates to efficient processes and what I call end-to-end business process redesign. And understanding how can you re-envision your processes with the customer in mind. So not necessarily to make it easier for your shared services group, although you certainly do want to increase efficiencies there, but where you really want to achieve the efficiencies are with your customers. Again, faculty, staff, students, prospective students, etc. Those are the ones you're wanting to create the benefits for. And then finally, your stakeholder engagement. So how do you help them feel valued? Well, if you can articulate for them certain benefits that are going to emerge, that's helpful. But to me, it's not just a one-way conversation with these stakeholders. It's getting them involved in that process redesign I was just talking about, where they're in the room helping you craft what that future state is and what they want to see, where ultimately they feel part of the final solution. And again, in my experience, campuses that pay attention to these 5 elements really position themselves for success in being able not only to develop an idea of what's possible with shared services, but as UAB has accomplished and as the University of Louisville has accomplished, it actually allows them to implement that successfully and then actually grow the services over time. Carolyn?
Very good. Thank you, Lee. And we referenced certainly the impact of the pandemic. We would be remiss if we didn't speak to it a little bit more specifically. So Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit to, what this last year has been like with the pandemic and your services, please.
Sure. Yeah, this is probably something that's affecting everybody, and I think the first one that we have on the screen is probably something that everybody's had to learn to do during this time, is to be flexible, or probably a better way to put it is be willing to pivot on how you provide services to students or people, or how you meet their needs. We see people in person all the time, and so we have a queuing system, and somebody asked a question about that a little bit ago, but we have a queuing system for people that come in so that they can get in line, and we call them back using our computer and telling them exactly where to go. Well, with the pandemic and shutting everything down, we had no need for it because we weren't seeing students in person. And so one of the things that we were able to do was contact our vendor, and they had already thought of what they were going to do in this instance. And they said that, well, what we can do is now do a phone call queue or a callback queue where students can check in and say, I would like a phone call back, or I'm in line for a phone call. And it would tell them exactly like how long their wait time was. And so we were able to meet the need there. We didn't have chat, and we don't now, but at the time we were able to get with our IT department and create a chat that students could utilize. And so we were able to expand like our virtual operations and options from there. And then we did learn that in our office, working from home is possible to some extent. Obviously, when the building was closed and everything, we all worked from home. But when we reopened, albeit a smaller scale, half of our office was working from home while the other half was in the office and meeting with students or working on things in the office that needed to be done in person. But we also learned that onboarding could be challenging. We hired somebody on, their first day was on a Monday, and I believe we went home on a Tuesday and didn't come back for about 6 months. And that was really difficult for her to adjust and get acclimated to our team. And so that was something that we had to figure out how to do. And then lastly, for us, team morale needs to be closely monitored. Our office is like a family unit in a sense, like that we enjoy being around each other for the most part. And we have fun. We do little celebrations and birthday celebrations, and we have little games that we'll do during our staff meetings every once in a while. So we really had to learn how we could do that virtually, or over Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever you might be using. And so that was something that was adjusting for us. But those are the things that we learned, and actually there's some things that we're going to continue to implement once we go back to, hopefully, business as usual. We'll continue to do some of these things, such as offering working from home when things are not quite as busy, and that probably, as many of you all are probably going to do, you probably will have less in-person meetings. You'll probably do more Zoom meetings, especially if you're at an urban campus like us. Instead of walking half a mile away to a meeting, it might just be that we allow people to start doing it virtually instead. So those are the things that we learned, but those are, I guess, hopefully I answered your question there, Karen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeremy. That's great. And so, Melissa, if you could speak to this as well. As I said, you both maintained really comparable numbers, it appears, sometimes even exceeding what you had experienced in the past. We'd like to understand how that's possible.
Yeah, transparency of systems was a huge win for us. As I mentioned, we use a customer relations management tool. Zendesk is the name of the tool we're using, and it really facilitates that business continuity. So we have one email address into our business operations center, businessops@louisville.edu. It comes in and gets triaged by our generalist, and then specialty items get moved or assigned to groups to work on them. And so when we picked up our laptops and a couple of monitors and our docking stations and went home on the 17th of March, we were up and fully operational 24 hours later. Because all of our systems, even our frontline folks, we have headsets for them. They took those home, and so we were really operating very quickly, well, within 24 hours the next day. So that laptop strategy, which we already had because of the design work we did early on in BizOps, it was helpful to have machines where we could pick it up and co-locate at that time in a conference room. And so we adopted that strategy early, and it paid off when the pandemic hit, for sure. Carolyn, as you mentioned, we track metrics, and so we had all of those metrics in place. We're very open about how our numbers are moving, and so we were able to continue and see that we weren't just meeting our numbers working remotely, but we were exceeding, and we innovated. We've got a product to track reconciliation approvals that's in pilot now. It was developed during COVID. We're in the process of merging in a new unit to support. We're doing that remotely. we like Jeremy, we hired a new employee and we've onboarded three new employees since COVID, and we're getting ready to bring in a couple of more. Another thing we did was we had a very early camera on culture. Main reason in the beginning was we just wanted to see each other so that we could make sure people were doing well, and that and we had each management team had the duty to make sure they checked in with their team every day. That helped. And then, like Jeremy, my final bullet is we created a fun committee. Like UAB, we are spending dedicated time appreciating one another. We've had a scavenger hunt that was a little bit hilarious. We've done Kahoot quizzes about each other to get to know each other more. I would argue in some ways we know each other better because of COVID than we would have if we were still in the office. So a lot of things that we'll take away. I'm pretty convinced we'll never go back, like the old normal, that it'll never be the new normal, because there'll be some component of remote work. The team told me very early on they love their commute and their coffee from home. So we'll see what the next 3 to 6 months bring.
That's great. Thank you both for that. And, you know, it occurs to me as both of you were speaking, I suspect your institutions were very glad that these service centers were in place when the pandemic arrived, because so many things were captured in a single service center. So just thought I would mention that. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes speaking to some of the physical configurations that we see for these spaces. It hadn't been mentioned yet, but I was actually at the University of Alabama at Birmingham when the one-stop shop was stood up. I had some responsibility for space management in the provost's office, and so was a part of the conversation for creating this. And there's some options to consider, and certainly, you know, finding that space on your campus that makes it possible is a big part of it. But a couple of different things to be thinking about. I'm showing a couple of open reception areas for, you know, students or customers that walk in and may be waiting for service. We often find that maybe they get some direction from the staff, but they feel better staying close to the service center to complete that task. So if they have any other questions, the staff are readily available to them. So even if it's not a large reception area, as you see in the picture on the left, just a little bit of seating that gives them that opportunity to remain in proximity to the space while they're kind of resolving their task, even if they're doing it kind of more from a self-service perspective, can be valuable. And then the service counter option, this is more aligned with what the University of Louisville has set up, and it's more of a service counter. So several staff are seated behind a common counter so that maybe the clients or the customers that are arriving in the space are queuing up similar to what we have done in a bank. Goodness knows if we'll ever do it again in a bank. But there's an opportunity for, you know, each person to be waiting on the next person in line. So if your space is more compact and that's a bigger factor for your decision making about how to stand this up, the service counter option offers a little bit more efficiency when it comes to the space utilization. Options for staff workspace and layouts, you know, I'm showing both a very open configuration with workstations on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, you see that those walls don't go completely to the ceiling, but it is individual office spaces. There are some conversations potentially that may require a level of concern for privacy for the students. So there is some consideration for, you know, should there be a small meeting room for one-on-one conversations with a student, perhaps a larger one? Should perhaps parents join that student for a conversation about some of the things that are being handled in that particular environment? In open work environments, certainly issues of privacy, you can move to a separate room, or you can work with things like sound masking and acoustic panels to manage the sound transmission between spaces. I don't want folks to think that it always has to be enclosed offices, because certainly there is some efficiency to be gained in the arrangements that we're seeing here. And you know, it's showing some additional workstation configurations. What you see at the bottom right, that is very simple, very straightforward. This was an environment that needed to be stood up very quickly in response to a need on that particular campus. So it's very straightforward. They identified a location, and Lee alluded to it sooner. I think something to be mindful of is if the clientele for the service is a student-focused clientele, then being where they are, like, you know, Jeremy mentioned that their space is in the Hill Student Center on that campus. On other campuses, I've seen them located in libraries where, you know, stacks have been removed and collections have been reduced. And so some opportunity opens up for these type of service centers to be where the students already are. If it's an administrative service, more similar to what they have at the University of Louisville, it doesn't necessarily need to be where the students are. So maybe that square footage is a bit removed from the core of campus and a bit more of a back of house feel, so that it's not consuming space that the students would like to be using for other purposes. And I think when we talk about space saving, certainly these centers, they consume space for certain. But the services that are left in the background, you know, the examples that Jeremy offered of the financial aid office and student accounts, if they no longer are as student facing, you know, there's always going to be one or two questions that do need to still go to that office. But the potential for those environments to be more open workstations, fewer individual offices, maybe in this next iteration on our campuses, more of those staff will be working remotely, if only part-time. Maybe they're in the office in a hoteling space 2 or 3 days a week, as opposed to being in their own dedicated office every day of the week. So when we talk about some of that real estate opportunity for savings, it's often in the services that are represented in these centers that the back of house can be more compact and more efficiently designed. And again, looking at some individual workstations, you know, multiple monitors, a chance to be sharing content, writing on the wall, kind of integrating a lot of the elements that would allow those conversations to be facilitated in that footprint. And again, thinking about that back of house that has been left of some of those services that are represented, looking at some design opportunity for creating that more compact footprint. You see some, you know, relatively small footprints that are very efficiently designed to optimize the utilization of the space that those services are currently occupying, potentially freeing up some square footage that either can be turned over for another use, or potentially, if it's something perhaps you are leasing, it could even be shed from the university's portfolio as an option for cost savings. So we're kind of circling back to that overarching conversation around the benefits of shared services. So Lee, given your perspective on these models, could you please detail the benefits as you see them of these models?
Absolutely. And the benefits that we see with shared services are really intertwined in a number of ways. I will start with cost savings because that is the benefit that many campuses raise first and want to understand. And the way that you achieve cost savings here is through a couple of different strategies. One is, if you think back to what I was discussing earlier, where you have many generalists around campus now who may have 30, 40, 50 or more activities they're responsible for, because of that breadth of responsibility, they may not be as efficient as they could be with certain transactions. They take a little longer. Sometimes they make mistakes that require rework. Sometimes there are policy or other compliance issues that require additional effort. or they have to stop and call somebody or email somebody. So what we refer to these circumstances as is the concept of fragmentation, that a lot of your work is fragmented across campus. If you begin to defragment that work and pull it into a shared services model, we often find that a lot of these transactions can be performed with efficiency rates of 10 to 20% or more. So the number of individuals you need to complete certain administrative tasks or other student-facing tasks may be lower, and very often is lower in a shared services environment than what it looks like in an existing environment. A lot of institutions look at this too as they're on a growth trajectory, trying to grow enrollment, trying to grow the number of faculty you have, et cetera. And how do they grow their institutions while not growing the administrative side of the house at quite the same rate? And shared services provides a great strategy to do that. Of course, the other benefit here relates to space. And if you, as Carolyn was mentioning a few minutes ago, if you shift to a shared services model, you can create a scenario where in your prime locations in the center of campus where your students may need to come, or where even some faculty and staff may need to come to a service counter for some assistance. By creating a shared services group, you limit the number of staff people you need really in those prime locations. And you can take some of the other support staff that are in the centers of expertise like HR, finance, the registrar's office, et cetera, and you can begin to move those to other locations on the periphery of campus, or as we've learned over the past year, you can actually transition some of those staff to remote work environments. So at the end of the day, it can actually reduce the space footprint you need on campus. I know many of the people on the call today are facilities professionals, and you understand well the costs associated with maintaining all of these spaces on campus. And as I've worked with some institutions, we've realized in some cases, if we create these shared services centers, there may be buildings on campus that you have to maintain today because you need a place for some of these offices to exist. But maybe in your future state campus plan, your master plan calls for the demolition of these buildings to free up spaces for new purposes. You can go ahead and move forward with the demolition of some of these spaces. Some of these older buildings are extremely expensive to maintain. And if you can shift some work virtually, you can really generate some cost savings. I touched a moment ago on some of the operational efficiency and process improvement items as well, but I do want to talk about service delivery. So when we talk to people on campuses, whether it's faculty and staff, whether it's students, et cetera, we hear loudly and clearly that they would like to see the service levels improve. And because that's such a core focus of this model, that's often welcomed on many campuses to see improvements in those areas. Part of that as well that you'll hear from faculty is as you make these improvements with processes and make it easier for students to get answers for questions, you free up other staff time on campus. So part of what a lot of staff tell us is, I don't have time to get to my usual job because I spend so much time being focused on transactions. What this model allows you to do is create a service center that's going to be focused on those transactions so that others can really focus on those really strategic responsibilities. Part of what you hear from faculty as well is, I want to spend more time doing the mission-focused work of my university. So that's teaching or doing research or treating patients. And when you have dated bureaucratic processes in place, it's difficult for them to spend as much time doing that as they would like. So this is often really embraced by faculty as well. The compliance challenges can be significant too. Again, if you have people performing transactions that don't understand all of the policies to the extent they should, you can unintentionally run into some challenges. But when you create those specialist roles within a shared services center, you have people that process these requests very consistently, or as students come in and ask questions, you're ensuring that they're getting consistent answers out of your office. And then finally, data integrity. And Melissa touched on this a few minutes ago as well. But because you can track data at a detailed level related to the transactions that you have, and at any given time of year, how much effort are you putting forward to certain transactions? And when do anomalies appear? And when those anomalies appear, you can begin to ask questions about what are the underlying causes, and are there some additional process improvement opportunities that exist, et cetera. So the benefits of shared services have really existed for quite a while, but I would say they've even been enhanced as a result of the pandemic overall, particularly with this opportunity potentially to transition more work to a remote setting. Carolyn?
Very good. Thank you, Lee. So Jeremy, of the benefits that Lee touched on, which of these do you feel has been and can continue to be the primary one for the one-stop service center at UAB?
Oh yeah, without doubt, I would have to say customer experience for sure, because we did not have a lot of our home offices, I call them home offices, but partnering offices is probably a better word, trained in customer service. They just didn't emphasize that when they were seeing students. And so one of the things that we are able to do in our office is to really push customer service as part of our training and onboarding when we hire new employees. And so it would definitely have to be customer service or customer experience, customer service, customer satisfaction. This is not a quote that I received or our office received, but one from another institution when visiting other one-stops, is that when they heard student feedback about their office, they said one of the things they got in a survey or whatever it might be is like, well, they told me no, but they told me no in the nicest way possible. And so that's one of the things that we strive to do, is if we cannot give the student exactly what they want, and that's oftentimes the case, we try to do it in a way that is at least, customer service friendly, knowing so that the student knows that we do care about their situation. It just may mean that we just can't give them exactly what they want. They may want their holder removed so they can register for classes, and that just goes against policy, but we try to provide them other avenues to explore to hopefully get that resolved.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And Melissa, this is kind of I guess it's almost a three-part question. Of these benefits, what hasn't played out the way that you expected? And to what do you attribute that? And does it remain a priority for the center? You may be muted.
Okay, I am now unmuted. Things that didn't work out as planned. Well, we started out as a process by process approach, and with the merger of another shared service organization, we took on departmental work that we did not anticipate in our original design. However, what we ended up doing was turning that into our own laboratory, right? So we had kind of owner and customer spaces within our own conversations. And so we were able to manage those openly with one another. And then again, with a merger that occurred about almost exactly 2 years ago, again, unexpected work, but not work that we could push back out to the organization once we pulled the employees in. And that was around strategy, that pre-decision support, that management support, where we merged to support the administration of the university. And so those were unexpected. I'm a big fan of turning whatever opportunity you have in front of you into a success of some sort. So I think we've been able to leverage those unexpected opportunities to improve and then to actually create additional growth opportunities for us.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. So we are getting to the end of our session content. My computer may be freezing up on me a little bit. There we go, going in the wrong direction. So there's some information here about the APA organization, and would also encourage you all, this concludes the content, but there are some ways of getting plugged into APA that we encourage you to explore. And I'm going to put our slide of presenters up on the screen one more time and encourage folks to turn on their cameras so that you all can grab this if you have questions for any of us as individuals. I can't see the questions, but Billy or Jeremy, is there anything there that we should address in the time we have remaining?
Sure. There's a few questions that have come in. I've actually answered a few, but I'll go back over some of those for just the good of everybody involved. But one that I think is probably would require or helpful if all four of us took it is one by Frank. It says, in Pennsylvania, the state system is grouping 6 universities into 2 regional groups, East and West. Could shared services models be applied to these groupings or to those groupings?
Lee, I'm going to suggest you pick up on that. My gut says yes, but perhaps you have some experience with this.
Absolutely. And even this week, I've had some conversations with groups of institutions who want to pursue shared services together. I think the groupings can exist in a number of ways. Sometimes I've seen them as groups of community colleges or groups of technical colleges wanting to create shared service centers that allow them to achieve some of these benefits we're talking about, but actually be able to leverage the remote workforce, et cetera, to create an effective center moving forward. So I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. You can group it by type of institution, you can group it by geography, you could group it by size of the institution as well, and that can make quite a bit of sense. Part of the exercise that we would walk through there is also helping to understand what are the funding mechanisms. So if you have multiple institutions involved, what's the relative amount of funding? And are you going to base that off of headcount of students or employees on each campus, or based on budget size? There are a number of different options there, as well as really developing some service level agreements. So what can the institutions expect out of the service center, and how do you really define that clearly and put it in writing so everybody has a clear understanding? But yes, I think there's tremendous opportunity from that multi-institution approach.
Okay. And Melissa, I was going to ask you to just respond from that training model. I appreciate that you have 2 centers in essence. You have one on the medical side and one on the academic campus. As I recall from our earlier conversations, people may shift to one or the other of those offices at a given time. What are the advantages that you see of that? Because I think that might be a factor in this conversation.
Yeah, at the University of Louisville, we have a health sciences campus, and then we have where our arts and sciences, law, speed, engineering, and there's about 2.5 miles between the 2 campuses. And that 2.5 miles is extraordinarily long when faculty or our medical professionals at the health sciences were having to come to Belknap to do a lot of their transactions. And so when we stood up the center and when we had a merger, we committed that we would provide weekly service to our health sciences community. So our staff in our old world were generally stationed at our Belknap campus, but we had at least 2 staff that, and to your point, Carolyn, we did not have a team HSC and a team Belknap. I was concerned if we did that, we would have inequities of service that could develop over time. And so we have weekly assignments from our customer service quality improvement team to support that HSC office. We're now independently serving one just to not cross-infect employees. But when we get back to where we can share spaces, we also had our management team spend at least 1 to 5 days a month at our health sciences campus as well, so that we weren't just hearing about the problems, but we were actually experiencing and seeing the interactions and working together. And that's been really well received. Our health sciences community, I think, is very pleased that they can walk over to a building and they don't have to give people directions to the bus line or to drive up to Belknap campus.
Yeah,
thanks for
that's great. Thank you. Jeremy, are there others?
Yes. So one of them was, does UAB use a generalist or specialist model? And I'm sure, Melissa, you could probably speak to this as well. And I basically told them that we like to consider ourselves as both, because if you look at it in a way, you know, what most people see in any particular office, they only see like the tip of the iceberg, which is, you know, what is visible to everyone. But what's beneath the surface is what you do, like back of office or behind the scenes, so to speak. And what our office does is we take all those tips of the icebergs and we do those in our office. And that's what allows the other offices to still exist, because they're doing everything that's beneath the surface. And so we actually have to have a wide range of knowledge on all these different topics. And so in a sense, we're specialists, but we're also generalists. And so we rarely have to elevate issues back to that partnering office or that home office, but there are times that we have to do that. And one particular example would be financial aid. Financial aid is just a beast in itself, as to, like, there's federal regulations that are constantly changing, or that, you know, you have to operate within, and we don't train our staff to know all of those things. And so that's why we do rely on that partnering office to help us guide those conversations, or to help us answer some of those questions that are probably above our, I wouldn't want to say pay grade, but they're just above what we've trained our staff to do.
Right, right. Melissa, anything to add to that?
No, we're the same way. We do have our generalist with a focus on our customer service quality improvement space, and we did that deliberately so to reduce the number of interruptions for our technical transactional folks. So we also approached it with a very much right people in the right seats. Some folks are more comfortable as a generalist being on the phone all day, and others are much more head down, just want to check off those transactional items. And so we were very deliberate in how we positioned our generalist and our specialist into seats.
Very good, very good. Jeremy, is there anything else? I think we have time for one more.
Sure. This one is a good one. I think I already answered the other one in a roundabout way, so we'll go with this one. It's what solutions or applications do you use to manage the caseload? And since I'm already talking, I'll just say in our office, we really only special software that we use is a queuing software, which I mentioned, for those that come in person. They check themselves in, and then they're placed in a queue, and then our counselors call them back when it's time for them to be served. And that is really helpful during those peak times when we may actually have 20 people arriving around the same time, which is typically around the start of a semester, or at different times throughout the semester. But you never see 20 people all at the same time. But the line management software, the queuing software, is very helpful within our office, and is actually almost kind of a standard thing for most one-stops across the country.
Okay. Melissa, anything to add there?
Yeah, we use a Zendesk customer relations management tool that is invaluable to managing it, not only just the data and the statistics it provides, but allowing people transparency, as we talked about with that business continuity, and facilitating communication, setting macros so that we can script some of our standard responses, which improves our speed of service on specific items, and then lets us see what's trending, what questions are coming in, and facilitates packaging things up, not only for our own resolution and improvements, but for the central offices that we partner with.
Yeah, and I would just add on this front, as you set up shared services centers, you often spend a lot of time thinking about technology enablement. And at times it means you have to go out and procure different solutions. Jeremy mentioned the queuing system, Melissa mentioned Zendesk. In other instances, we find, though, that because you are reducing the number of people who touch certain transactions on campus, that you actually sometimes have the opportunity to better leverage technology you already own. So in an existing state where you may have hundreds of people across campus who can touch a certain type of transaction, it's very difficult to be agile with your technology and take advantage of new functionality, because then you have to figure out, how are you going to train 300, 400, 500 people how to use that? If, however, you have a shared services center where you have 5 or 10 people focused on a certain type of transaction, it becomes very easy to enable new functionality and use it. And in some cases, you already own it and pay for it. You just haven't been able to use it effectively before.
Very good. Thank you. So I think that brings us to the conclusion of our time. I'll turn back to you, Billy.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone who has taken time to attend this webinar, and I want to thank our speakers for a very informative session. Again, thank you so much. Be safe, stay healthy. Until next time, goodbye.
Thank you.